Honest members of the General Assembly from both sides of the aisle have some good ideas, and so do I. It's time to end the practice of legislators serving as paid lobbyists. In fact, it's time to end the for-profit influence peddling among all elected officials at every level of government in Illinois. Disclosure of conflicts of interest and punishment for breaching them must be included in any ethics package for us to truly clean up government. Most states have a revolving door provision for legislators, and it's time for Illinois to join them. Elected officials shouldn't be allowed to retire and immediately start lobbying their former colleagues. It's wrong, and it's got to stop. There are many more ethics reforms that must be addressed this spring, and I expect the legislature's Bipartisan Ethics Commission to issue its report in the next 8 weeks. Restoring the public's trust is of paramount importance. Let's not let the well-connected and the well-protected work the system while the interests of ordinary citizens are forgotten. There is too much that needs to be accomplished to lift up all of the people of Illinois. The overwhelming majority of people involved with government and public policy and politics here in Illinois truly just want what is best for this state. From legislators to citizen activists to reporters, they chisel away at intractable problems and put their shoulders into making real, lasting institutional change. They don't get distracted or dejected, whether they're battling poverty, fighting for increased education funding, or fixing the unglamorous but essential problems of our state's IT infrastructure. Illinois is full of people who love our state and are willing to work earnestly every day to fight for her, which is why we have to be committed to the hard work of changing another aspect of the political culture in this state that has too often rewarded a go-along to get along attitude at the expense of truly ethical conduct. When I took office a year ago, I hired people who came from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, who were diverse in gender, in race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, geography, and life experience, and whose only loyalty is to good ideas and good results. And I took heat for it from some who had been here a very long time. Many were incredulous that I wasn't just automatically hiring the same old faces that get jobs year in and year out. A commitment to diversity and inclusion is not just a talking point for me, and I hope that the past year has proven that. I have an administration that looks far more like the state that we represent than any that has come before it. I have elevated talented people who have been overlooked for far too long, and our state is doing better because of it. Change needs to happen, and much of this change needs to happen outside of the scope of legislation. It's about how we, as public officials, conduct ourselves in private that also matters. Common sense and basic decency need to prevail in the everyday interactions that make government work. People need to treat disgusting suggestions with disgust. The old patronage system needs to die, finally and completely. The input of women and people of color need to be treated as essential to decision-making, not as some token show of diversity. Bit by bit, inch by inch, I am working hard to reverse the harm that has been done to people and communities that have been left behind over many generations by government policies and elected officials who were content to simply ignore them. I remind myself every day that I have obligations not just to the current people of Illinois, but to the many people who preceded us, who were discriminated against, harmed, treated as lesser and forgotten. Lasting damage that echoes through too many communities today. We are obligated to make our future more equitable and fair. I came into this office with the message that I am committed to doing things differently in my administration. A lot of folks didn't believe me a year ago. Now you can see how far we all can come in a year, even when the work still remains. It's time for us to recommit ourselves to the hard work of bringing prosperity and opportunity to all communities in Illinois through a fairer tax system, job creation, education and job training programs, childcare and preschool, and a focus on building essential tools of success, such as high-speed internet in all corners of our state. This spring, working with legislators, we will begin the long path toward a fairer criminal justice system. That starts with phasing out cash bail and following many of the recommendations made by the Bipartisan Criminal Justice Reform Commission created by my predecessor, most of whose ideas were never adopted because of the rancor and dysfunction. Our spring agenda must also address the pressing issue of adopting new clean energy legislation that reduces carbon pollution, promotes renewable energy, and accelerates electrification of our transportation sector. We saw the effects of climate change right here in Illinois last year with a polar vortex, devastating floods, record lake levels, and emergency declarations in more than a third of Illinois' counties. Urgent action is needed. But let me be clear. The old ways of negotiating energy legislation are over. It's time to put consumers and climate first. I am not going to sign an energy bill written by the utility companies. Property taxes in Illinois are simply too high. And that's why it's time to put the best ideas to work from both sides of the aisle. Local governments continue to max out their levies even when they don't need to. There are perverse incentives in state law that encourage that. We can change the law to support local governments and lower property taxes. And with nearly 7,000 units of government in Illinois, it's time to empower local taxpayers and voters to consolidate or eliminate them. These changes, along with our landmark pension reform that consolidated police and firefighter pensions, can make a serious dent in property taxes. Today in Illinois, we are governing with our heads and our hearts. In a time when cynicism has too often become the rule rather than the exception, we're proving that we really can make progress. We're showing the rest of the nation that pragmatic, progressive leadership is good. And putting our state back on the side of working families is important. A year ago, I shared a story at my inauguration. It was also about flags, about how a couple in Barrington, Illinois, had their pride flag stolen from their backyard and replaced with an American flag. Bigots wrapping themselves in a veil of patriotism are an increasingly familiar sight these days, and it's a dangerous trend. But the community fought back. A neighbor, Kim Fillion, upon hearing about the incident, put a pride flag in her yard in solidarity. And then suddenly lots of people were asking for them, and she was giving out pride flags to everyone in Barrington. They were popping up in yards all over the neighborhood. Kim told the news at the time, "Frankly, I've grown weary of this, of all this hate. And I gotta say, it just seemed like there was one thing that I could do that I had control of." I've thought a lot about that story this past year. It reminds me of the fundamental goodness and decency of the people who live here in Illinois,